Today we've got a crazy revenge story of getting somebody expelled from school. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, love at first sight. I never believed in the concept of love at first sight until I met a lady who got my heart on lockdown during one summer holiday. I didn't like to believe that I was a lover boy until I met a 20-year-old female, let's call her M, who completely swept me off my feet. M and I met at a music festival, and we bonded over a couple of rap music which we both found fascinating. We bonded instantly, and it was a connection I wanted to explore. To me, she was like a magnetic force that could keep me glued for a long time. Well, I guess she liked me right back, but she needed to play hard to get because nothing else could explain why she became a little dramatic when it was time for us to leave the festival arena. She refused to share her mobile number or anything about her that could bring us closer easily, but I managed to get her name. That was a smart move on my part. After a meticulous search, I was able to get her on her socials. I managed to ask her out on a date, even though she tried so hard to make it a difficult agenda for me. I think she had a thing about making a fuse of many things, although I wouldn't have her any other way. During the dates, it turned out that our bond was special and we could get something serious out of our bond, or so I thought. The icing on the cake was when we realized that we were in the same college. I knew right there that I had found the love of my life. Days grew into weeks and weeks into months, and it became evident that Em and I had grown on each other. We were given the tag lovebirds, and we lived up to the name as we were always seen playing Romeo and Juliet all around college, even though we were yet to officially become a couple. During our talking stage, memories of how I used to keep to myself through my beginning years at college flooded through my mind. I was labeled a shy guy because of my inability to approach ladies, even though they flocked around me like bees. Still, it was difficult for me to tell Em of my intention to have something deeper than the budding friendship between us. I feared what her response would be because she took a while to concede to my request to have us become a couple officially. I waited patiently for a whole month, and I knew how difficult it was to breathe each day. I remember vividly the wild experience I had with a girl who rejected me after she made me fall head over heels in love with her. That was the first time I had all the courage in the world to go after a girl I admired. But the aftermath of that courage was something that further drove me into my shell. I kept feeling every girl I wanted wouldn't want me. As much as I had fear in my heart, I was very much certain that all I ever wanted was Em. For me, it was love at first sight. I knew that from that moment when our bodies rocked to the same music and when we bonded as if we had known each other for centuries. Well, when Em finally agreed to return my love, I felt like the Prince of Wales. I didn't need a soothsayer to remind me how lucky I was. For one, Em was a gorgeous girl who could easily make a statement wherever she found herself. I remember a time when I took her on a date to one of the most exotic restaurants on campus. I saw how many heads turned to give me an approving grin. You know that type of smile that makes you feel like you've hit a jackpot? That was the type of smile I got from different people. To top it all off, she managed to combine beauty with intelligence. I mean the type of intelligence that can make you imagine how lucky you would have to be to have such a woman pass on her genes to your kids. That exactly was the major reason why I was determined to pursue her. I considered myself the sleekest man alive in our first few months of dating, but while I was sure I wanted to spend the rest of my life with Em, she always managed to evade that question whenever I tried to discuss the possibility of making her my wife. On the occasions that got me worried was when we were in the midst of friends having a nice time and indulging in games. One of us had started a series of truth or dare questions, which I considered unnecessary. This friend had asked Em if she had met the father of her children yet, and I was stunned to see that she said she would rather pass on that question. Trust me, I spent the entire evening feeling disoriented and in shock. I didn't understand what she thought we were doing together, or what I meant to her, if not a potential spouse. After the events, I couldn't shake off the shock and the disappointment in me. I was compelled to ask her if she couldn't see a future with me. Her response got me off guard. She told me that nothing was certain, that anybody could change. I tried to picture a scenario where I would wake up suddenly and decide to woo and court another girl out of the blue. It didn't add up to me. I wondered if she meant that she was the one that was capable of switching on me. Right there, I made it clear to her that I was not interested in any trial and error. I was 23 and would be a college graduate in less than 3 months. I knew I wasn't passing time with her, and I hoped she wasn't doing the same with me. To be honest, I was a bit disappointed with the way she envisioned what we had. I had thought in all sincerity that she saw me the way I saw her, someone she could picture with her forever. By that, we were 1 year gone, and I thought 1 year was enough for her to see that we weren't playing with each other. Unconsciously, I began to withdraw from her. I couldn't get past the pain of being made to look like a joke in public. I remember how my closest friend asked me if I hadn't told M that I was certain I wanted her in my future. He was a bit disappointed too because he knew how much of myself I gave into the relationship. No matter the questions asked, I had no answer to give anyone because I was sure that I wasn't the problem at that point. However, as much as I tried to withdraw from M, she wouldn't let me to myself. She kept being her usual self around me, and those gestures only infuriated me the more. I couldn't comprehend how one would spend her adult life dating someone she wasn't sure of marrying. But no matter how many times I told her I wasn't comfortable with such a situation, she never seemed to be ready to leave me alone. So eventually, I gave up trying to convince her to see a future with me. I equally decided to live in the moment because I was too in love to let her go. Then finally, we rounded off college, in a grand style if I must say. Em and I went on a series of dates, and we had so much fun as we spent our last days together. We didn't live in the same states, and we knew we were going to be apart from each other for some time. I seized one of those moments to ask Em if our love still meant uncertainty. For some seconds, Em was quiet, and when she found her voice, she reiterated slowly like she always had done, "Nothing is promised, anyone can change." She went ahead to add, "If you find love in Texas, where I lived, hold it dear." I spent the rest of our ride back to the campus in quiet solitude. I was sure that there was nothing I could do to make Em change her views about our relationship. She had every right to maintain whatever views she held then. Weeks later, we graduated college and we parted ways in the best way we could. In those final moments, I spent a great deal of time wondering if I'd just been used, maybe to pass the time. Still, I didn't give in to the urge to ask her to give us a stronger chance. While she lived in Washington, it was so easy for the gap between us to widen. I was the frequent caller between us, and also the one who was always trying to plan a visit. After so much effort, I got tired of trying to make things work right between us, and I finally decided to let things slide. To my surprise, Em didn't try to fight for us. I can't remember seeing her pull any string to pull us together again. Then I became bewildered. In the beginning, I thought what we shared was mutual. I thought she wanted me as much as I wanted her. I waited patiently for her to return my love, and I didn't get where we missed it. Later, I realized we didn't miss it anywhere. Instead, I was the one who was blind to reality. Weeks after I decided to choose myself, I got a shocking revelation that got me sprawling in pain and anger. It took me a long while to believe and accept that I was a second option to Em. News had it that she had dated 2 guys all through college, of which I was the second option out of the 2 guys. Unbelievable, I must say. Em was able to pull that off because the other guy had graduated before us and was one of those big boys in town who was making a name for himself. My best friend, who saw that I was drowning, decided to help me up since I couldn't do so myself. I was dazed at the news he shared with me, and I was determined not to believe it until I got a hold of the truth. By the time I got wind of the truth myself, I was way more shocked than I'd been before. As anger swelled within me, I couldn't help but wonder why Em would want to put me through so much pain and disgrace. I didn't deserve to be the pawn in her messy game. What made me know that I was going to punish Em the same way I had loved her was when I realized that she was planning to get married to this guy. So nothing was uncertain after all. I was just a poor guy who was victim of a callous girl who was made of a heart of stone. The picture of how messy the situation looked made me wonder why she held on to me even when I pulled away. I guess she was bent on making a mockery of me, which I was determined to make her pay for. With the help of my best friend, I was able to locate the mystery guy, and we spared no effort to convince him that Em had been playing the 2 of us for the longest time. The mystery guy was disappointed and equally pained. He called Em over and revealed to her a grand surprise, which was me. Thanks to my best friend, neither the mystery guy nor I would spend the rest of our lives in misery. Honestly, this is just kind of like the classic we both just realized we were getting played by the same person kind of story. The good old, hey surprise, we're both here. Yeah, your whole world's crumbling down now, ain't it? Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be awesome if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. Our next story is me versus my family. My father, 41, alongside my brother, 24, have always made me their plaything for as long as I can remember. I'm currently 21, and I can't count the number of times that I've been SA'd by them. Things would have progressed for as long and gone as far as I could control or have done something about. And the worst part of the entire thing is the fact that my humble mother was ever aware of the entire situation. And I guess it had never occurred to her the fact that she could have most definitely have done something to at least protect her child or something. And she just let whatever it was that was happening to me continue. And for that, I forever curse the day she brought me into this world, assuming the role of my mother. Let me take you right to the very beginning, the genesis, if you may, of everything that had transpired in my entire life that has made me regret the day I was born, and also how I was able to escape the clutches of my own assaulting family, which was practically my brother and father. I can remember almost as clear as the day when it all began. I had just begun undergoing puberty, and you could obviously tell from the distinct physical changes. I think it's worth it to mention the fact that I've always been skinny all my life. I was always made fun of by my so-called friends, and then all of a sudden I just had a complete turnover when I'd hit 18, when I was already beginning to develop faster than I could have even imagined or prepared myself for. And as for my parents, they were readily available and ever present in my life to walk me through the changes I was undergoing. My mother especially, and this was because she was practically the only person that I could say, with almost certainty, that understood what it was that I was going through. And also the fact that some changes were going to seem abnormal and all. Basically put, since I was the only daughter, I got the baby girl treatment when I was undergoing puberty. And I guess at some point, it was fun being treated like a really special child that I thought I was. Then I had begun to notice a few changes in behaviors and characters of the other members of my home, which includes my father and my brother. At first glance, one would openly think that they were just being overly protective and affectionate with me. But at some point, in all of these, it was slowly but surely creeping towards the area where it was not supposed to. I must admit, I was still inexperienced at the time, and I wasn't too sure of what was going on or the kinds of behaviors they were exhibiting. Simply put, I was totally oblivious to everything that was going on around me. And this was apparent because I was with family and I felt like there was nothing I should have been worried about and all. Little did I know that I was in the midst of predators disguised as my family. No matter how oblivious I must have been at that time, it was clear to me at the time that the way my brother and father stared at me most times was quite uncomfortable. And because of that, I started to wear clothes that would fully cover my body up without showing skin anywhere. And then right after this, I realized that this only drove them all more crazy. And they moved on from staring to actually taking action. The first person to have ever taken action was my father. And I was quite literally helpless at the time, as this was a day where my mother had taken my brother out to the mall to pick up quite a number of things, and most of which were heavyweight. I was left alone with my father at home, and I didn't think much of it, so I decided to wear something I was comfortable in, which also in turn didn't show as much skin as possible just to prevent him from staring and all. It was akin to a lion instantly pouncing on its prey without giving it a moment's thought. After that day, I was never the same. I was always scared of him whenever I saw him around the house, and I am most definitely sure of the fact that my mother noticed this, but she chose to remain silent, as she later revealed that she was inherently unaware of what was going on, and she didn't want to jump to conclusions, which to me just sounds like a whole load of nonsense, as it was just as easy as asking me right then and there what the problem was. Anyways, I was scared of my father for quite a while. And almost every night, 2 weeks after that fateful day, he had begun coming into my room late at night, doing the same evil act over and over again for as long as my memory can track back. There was quite literally nothing I could do, as I was scared witless, as I felt really helpless back then. And just when it was seeming like everything was bad enough as it was, My brother apparently caught my father in the act one particular night when he woke up late in the midnight. And when you would expect that he was going to take the most logical and reasonable action towards correcting the wrong that was happening, as most big brothers would, he took it upon himself to continue from whenever my father had stopped whenever he had the chance or opportunity to do so. You can only imagine the way I had slowly but surely begun to sow and feel about myself. I just couldn't understand how this kind of thing would happen to me, considering the fact that I was just developing a little bit faster at my age, and at 19, I was already looking like a woman in her mid-20s, nearing her late 30s. The only thing I realized out of all of this was the fact that my mother was readily aware of everything that was going on, as she could not openly come out and say that she didn't notice her husband, my father, leave her room every single night for weeks without saying anything. Until today, that was still the one thing I could not understand. Anyways, these actions by my brother and father went on for approximately 6 months, 4 weeks, and 6 days. I had a record for every single day and every single thing they'd done. Not like I was planning on using it against them or anything at the time, but it was just a way for me to retain even the slightest bit of sanity at the time, as I felt like if I didn't do that, I could quite literally lose my mind. And even though I felt like I was keeping it all together, the reverse was the case, quite literally. Because right back in school, I was in my final year of high school when I noticed that I wasn't getting any form of attraction for any guy, be it the guys in my grade or even those in a lower grade that the girls in my grade were fawning over. I just couldn't seem to find any one of them of particular interest. And even the ones that approached me to ask me out and all because the final winter dance was approaching and all, I still found some way or the other to turn every single one of them down. And I knew that this was a problem because the only people I felt comfortable with touching me at the time were either one of the two people that usually came into my room at night. And I just knew right then and there that I had something already fundamentally wrong with me. And I knew I had to do something about the whole situation when I was invited over to the guidance counselor's office because of a certain emotional outrage I had when someone tried to forcefully handle me. And by someone, I mean quite literally a friend of mine. We were having fun, and I was just uninterested at the time, and after being unsuccessful in that respect, she tried to drag me along, and I raged out on her. It was unlike me, as I was usually calm and composed. I was then placed before the counselor, where I was to let out every single thing I was feeling. It took quite a while before I was able to open up to a complete stranger about what was truly on my mind. I didn't even know where to start from, or even how to start. But one day, when I was really comfortable enough to talk, and when I felt like I've had enough of the way I was being treated, I finally spoke up. And with immediate effect, the counselor had asked me if I had tangible enough evidence to corroborate my story and all. I knew I had tons of them, but I was quite hesitant first. I guess because they were still family and all. But after the events that had happened at home that night, I had already made up my mind to make sure that every single member of my family paid for the way I was being treated. When I got home that very day, I had opened up to the counselor. After telling her I had nothing to corroborate my story yet, I decided to tell off my brother and my father when they came to my room that same night again. But this time, I don't know what came over my father at the time, but he immediately lashed out at me. He physically abused me, ergo making me completely submissive. At this moment, I just knew that if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would. And so the very next day, I threw away all feelings of hesitations I was feeling as I took everything I had over to the counselor as evidence. And she was really sympathetic. She immediately assured me that everything was going to be okay. She contacted the appropriate authorities and they sprung to action almost immediately. My father, alongside my brother, were taken into custody. While my mother remained behind, I incriminated her as she also played a part in everything, as she could have easily have intervened, but she chose to be ignorant. And for that, I hate her even more than my abusive brother and father. I was to undergo rehab and weekly therapy sessions for my mental health and physical state and all. While I was there, the counselor made sure that they had all received maximum punishments for their actions. And that alone wasn't nearly enough to make up for what I'd gone through in silence, but it was recompense enough at the time, and I was okay with it. I mean, I'm just glad in the end, these monsters got held accountable for what they did. But is everybody else just as hung up as me on the counselor saying, "Well, do you have any evidence that you can bring me?" Isn't it ridiculous in theory for somebody to spill their guts out and say, "I'm being abused," and for them to say, "Well, do you have any evidence of that?" That's just a ridiculous response. That said, our next story is, I got my ex-boyfriend expelled from school. My ex physically attacked me, he apologized, then denied it later. I ratted him out to the college as one of the people who hacked into the school system. He was expelled. Many years back, I was a small, naive young woman in college. In my first year, I met Greg, not real name, who was 23 at the time. He was in his sophomore year but had failed most of his courses in freshman year, so he was in some of my classes. Greg wasn't particularly handsome, but he looked good. He also had a unique way of styling his hair, and that attracted me to him in the first place. The first day I spoke to Greg was in class. The professor had grouped us into groups of 5, and Greg was in my group. He smiled at me when I walked up to him and told him we were in the same group. His front tooth had a little chip in it, but I still thought his smile was beautiful. When he said, "I've just been paired with a beautiful woman," I smiled again. I realized that Greg was struggling academically, and for some reason I just wanted to help. I offered to tutor him, and he agreed. We'd hang out in public places on campus, and he'd tell me about how getting an education means very much to him. He was the first person in his family to even earn a high school diploma, and so far, it looked like he was the only one who ever would. His siblings were older and had all dropped out of high school before senior year. He promised his dad that he would do all he could to finish school, and his dad supported and promised to help him pay tuition. I should have known at the time that my ex-boyfriend's relationship with his father was absurd. My ex didn't just love and respect his father, he adored him and nearly worshipped him. He did whatever his father wanted him to do and went to great lengths to please him, even though he claimed to dislike his father. He told me that when they were younger, his dad would hit his mother and siblings. He was very young at the time and the details were quite hazy. One day, his dad went to church and found the Lord. He called his family together and promised that he would never hit anyone again. But it was too late. His children despised him. All of my ex's siblings dropped out of school and left home. Only he and his mother stayed. And while his dad truly stopped hitting his mom, he remained emotionally and verbally abusive. Whenever he was mad, he would call them names and yell at them. Then he would apologize later and ask them to pray together as a family. I think his dad knew that he'd lost his other children and was terrified that my ex, like his other children, would leave him. He forbade my ex from having any sort of contact with his older siblings. And even though my ex and his mom still communicated with his siblings, they hid it from his dad. Anyway, months into the relationship, things were not okay. My ex, just like his dad, was abusive. He got mad about everything and had a problem with nearly everything I did. The only time we were okay was whenever I was with him and agreeing to whatever he said or did. I could never disagree with him without him getting worked up about it. He was also always unsettled about me being away from him. I always had to let him know where I was going to be at all times. I also had to tell him who I was with to provide some evidence of me being there with that person or those people. At first, these things seemed minute, small things that I could do to assure my man of fidelity, but it became excessive, and the more I pushed back, the more he suspected that I was cheating or something of the sort. He got jealous of everyone I was around, even my friends. He'd say they didn't like him, and that one day they would tell me to leave him. Nothing I ever said or did was enough to convince him that I was never going to leave him. Then he went on to verbal abuse. My mom is a single mom, so he'd say that I didn't understand how a two-parent household worked. He was supposed to lead, and I was supposed to follow and listen to him. He would throw shades at my mother and use derogatory words when we argued. It was unbearable for me. The physical abuse started when we were together in his dorm room one day, and he said something about me being dumb and insensitive. We'd had a very minor argument when he said that. It was completely uncalled for. I got mad, picked up my purse and tried to leave, but he grabbed my wrist and shoved me back on his bed. For nearly an hour, I struggled to leave, but he wouldn't let me. I left his room that day with my mind made up to leave. I decided I was done with that relationship, but he came back begging. He even asked my friends to talk to me, which was surprising because he didn't like my friends. After numerous apologies, I went back to him, and for a while his behavior changed. He still kept tabs on me, but it was quite subtle. His questions always seemed to come from a place of genuine concern. At the time, my ex was having issues with one of his courses. He had failed it a second time and didn't want to fail the third time. The course was an English grammar course, and my ex was very bad at language studies. The course was, however, required, so he had to get a good grade in it to graduate. My ex was a computer programmer and had at some point learned to hack systems, so he met up with one other guy on campus and they agreed to hack the school system together. The guy he did it with was in his senior year. He just wanted to leak exam questions to others in his class and get them to like him. My ex didn't know this though. The other guy had told him that he wanted to see the questions for another course's exam because, like my ex, he'd been failing it. When they both did it, the other guy was very generous with the exam questions. He gave everyone the questions and had them printed just the day before exams. Word spread and soon everyone caught on to what had happened, including the school admin. They had meetings and decided to cancel the exams and have students retake them, but the students protested. The school board found their protests to be reasonable. Canceling the exams and making students start over would be unfair to students who had worked hard enough for the exams and didn't see the exam questions. Arranging for the students to take new exams would also cost the university a lot of money and manpower, since they'd have to construct a whole new timetable and provide exam materials. The school decided against canceling and rescheduling the exams, but they began investigating who it was that was behind the hacking. I knew all along that it was him. He told me all about it and carried me along all throughout the process. My ex trusted me. He knew I'd never rat him out. A week after he finished his exams, I was in his dorm room with him. Everything was good. We were lying on his tiny bed together, talking about stuff and just enjoying each other's company. I then told him that I had to leave. I had an exam left and I'd promised my study buddies, 2 guys I was taking the course with, that I'd be around so we could go to the library and study together. He asked who my study buddies were, and when I told him, he asked if I was sleeping with them. I was shocked. I didn't respond though. I just got up and made to leave. He stopped me and shoved me back on the bed, saying that he knew I was going to see those guys and that he was right about me cheating on him. I cried and begged, but he held me tightly on the neck. He was choking me and I could feel myself slipping out of consciousness when he left me alone. I started to cough, tears were pouring down my eyes, and I was confused and weak. I couldn't speak and could barely even hear. I saw him plug his headset on and walk out of the room. When he returned, I was still on his bed, shocked about what had happened and weak. He knelt beside his bed and in tears, he apologized. I could barely hear what he said. As he spoke, tears rolled down my eyes. As I cried, he cried too. I wasn't fooled though. It wasn't clear to me before that day, but I'd become very sure of what was going on. My ex was never going to stop abusing me until I did something. He already thought he owned me. He walked to my dorm room that evening and kissed me goodnight. I had to wear a turtleneck sweater on campus that week to hide the redness on my neck. After I sat for the exam I was going to study for, I walked to the student affairs office and asked to see the dean. The dean wasn't available, so I was taken to see the sub-dean. I told him that I knew who was behind the hack in the school system. He asked if I was certain, and I said I was, and he invited someone else and made a recording of my confession. Of course, I lied. I told them I didn't know my ex was planning to do that, and I only found out after he did it. My ex was invited the next day and questioned. When he returned, he called me and said he wanted to talk and that there was trouble. He still didn't think that it was me. He was certain that it was the guy he worked with. I was going to tell him it was me, but I decided against it. I didn't know what he could do and wanted to protect myself. After a while, the student disciplinary committee decided to expel him. He was devastated. Despite being that sad, he still came to my dorm room one day and yelled at me for not being there for him. When I told him I was breaking up, he tried to hit me, and I yelled loudly. Some of the girls in my hall came into my room and called the campus security. They took him away and banned him from the school premises. He tried to reach out many times after that, but I refused to speak with him. He would send a text apologizing to me and then send another calling me a wicked, evil witch. I ignored all that until he stopped contacting me. I was just glad that he was out of my life for good and that I'd gotten back at him for what he did to me. Honestly, even after all that, I feel like if I were in OP's position, even for years afterwards, I think I would have some small level of paranoia that this guy is going to try to pop back up somehow. Sadly, it just seems like the way this guy grew up got imprinted upon him, and honestly, I just hope at some point this guy went off to try to get some actual help. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.